I think that everybody at New Vision makes a contribution to this community. Some do it sooner than others. Sandy's only been with us for a few weeks, and we've all enjoyed her wonderful music. And it was Sandy who suggested that I did a little presentation on the theme of pilgrimage today. So thank you, Sandy.
I'm excited.
Okay. I want you to cast your minds back to the Middle Ages in Europe. And this is a time frame from about 500 to 1500. So it's not very easy to do. That's a long time frame. And also, the world was different then, very different. Ordinary people were not able to have their own worldview. The church had an absolute stranglehold on belief. The only people who were educated were the clergy and the higher ranks of the nobility. And when the people went to church, the services were in Latin, so they couldn't understand them anyway. So they had to take it on trust that they lived in a world where good deeds or sins caused the pleasure or the displeasure of God. So anything that happened, whether it was floods or famine, whether it was pestilence or good fortune, was thought to be God's response to human behavior. Good deeds were rewarded and bad deeds were punished. And it was kind of management by fear. And when you came to the end of your life, if you were wicked, you went to hell. If you were less wicked, you would spend some time in purgatory before being purified enough to go to heaven. And the people were concerned about that length of time in purgatory. But the church offered them some ways to reduce that time in purgatory, kind of a get out of jail free card. And one of those was to go on pilgrimage. And you might think that the people who went on pilgrimage were very pious people, maybe priests, monks, nuns. But in fact, pilgrimage was open to a much wider range of people, because pilgrimage was not that expensive, and it also gave you an opportunity to escape your debts. And pilgrimages took a long time, so you could be gone for a year and escape your debts. And the people who went on pilgrimage, sure, there would be some religious folk, monks and nuns and so on, but there would be relatively ordinary folk. Not the poorest peasants, but if you were, say, a trader, a stonemason, and in the case of English pilgrims, if you could afford the passage across the ocean, you could go on pilgrimage. And once you were on your pilgrimage, you didn't have to pay for inns and food. You were supposed to rely on the hospitality of the local people. So there would be mainly men going on pilgrimage, but quite often women would go on a pilgrimage because they would go on behalf of a sick child. And it was believed that if you went on a pilgrimage and you got to the remains of a dead saint, maybe an ossified finger, a shriveled heart, or maybe a splinter of the true cross, that those remains might be able to bring about a healing miracle, as well as to reduce your time in purgatory. So women would go on behalf of sick children. And when there are women, and it's a journey of a year or so, there are a few babies go on pilgrimage as well. And this is the days of chivalry. So knights would go on pilgrimage to get to the remains of the dead saint to ask for good fortune in battle, and they would take with them their squires. Squires were usually young boys, maybe 11 or 12 years old, so they would also be on pilgrimage. And then there's the entertaining case that if you were a rich person with a guilty conscience because you'd done a lot of sinning, you could employ a poorer person to go on pilgrimage in your stead. And they would have all the risks of pilgrimage, and you got the benefit for the reduced time in purgatory. When you're going on pilgrimage, you first of all go to a service of blessing in a church where you receive your pilgrim papers. And once you've got your pilgrim papers, you're entitled to put on the pilgrim uniform. Going to ask Chris to stand up. He is styling the modern pilgrim uniform. However, he is way too clean.
I took a shower this morning. I should have waited.
So, would you please put on the medieval pilgrim uniform?
This is as close as we could find to medieval.
Sure.
So you had to have your cloak, which kept you...
I will tell about the
Oh, good. Go for it. Have fun.
Yeah. So there's the pilgrim cloak.
If I can find the other side. There.
Okay.
It does.
The pilgrim hat, wide brim to keep the sun off you. Did you pick up the little purse?
I did.
Yeah? It was called a scrip in those days. And there was the pilgrim's staff. Now, our cloak is a little on the short side. The pilgrims of those days would wear a great long cloak. And this uniform had both practical and spiritual significance. I don't know about the hat, but the cloak was all-encompassing, and it acted as your sleeping bag, as well as your travel cloak. And it was to remind you of the ever-present, all-encompassing presence of God. The staff was to ward off wolves. And in those days, the wolf was thought to be the embodiment of the devil. The little purse was deliberately small because you were not supposed to take much with you. It was to remind you of humility and your dependence on others. So that's the pilgrim uniform. And as you can imagine, we have this motley crew on pilgrimage. Some of them were sick before they went because they wanted a miracle of healing, and they have very few resources that they're taking with them. So many people actually died on pilgrimage. Fortunately, when Chris and I went on our pilgrimage, we did not die, and Chris is here to sing you part of a song he composed about our pilgrimage.
I need to take off some of these pilgrim clothes. It's awfully hard to do anyway. So I'll sing a little piece. You sing it back to me. Ultrea. Your turn. Ultrea. Good, pilgrims. Jesus ea. Jesus ea. Ultrea. A little higher. Ultrea. Jesus ea. Jesus ea. Very good. So that's where the song began. It was a song heard, and then I just built the rest of it. Along the way you walk in sun, along the way you walk through rain, along along the way beneath the field of stars, till morning comes again. Along the way you take the pleasure of your drink and daily bread, as each day you glean the treasure of the trail you find ahead. Along the way, along the way the blazing sun, along the way the cooling rain, along the way the crystal field of stars, till morning comes again. Along the way you take to heart the tales the trovadores speak, take note of miracles the pilgrims find while faithfully they seek. Along the way, every day you're edging nearer, crossing golden growing land. Every day you're growing stronger than you were when you began. Every day increasing thankfulness with fortune that you find, the courage to continue on your weakness well in mind. Along the way, Udrea, Jesus, Jean.
Are you staying there?
Might as well.
Okay. So Chris and I hiked the Camino de Santiago de Compostela. It's a good few years ago since we did this, and we did it over 3 summers, 3 blisteringly hot summers. Chris was teaching at the time, so that was the time that we had available to us. And we took the most popular route, the French route. The Camino de Santiago de Compostela essentially goes across Spain, but there are many starting points. There are many ways to do the Camino. So all of these routes come through Europe and converge at Santiago de Compostela. Camino means the way, Santiago, St. James, de Compostela, field of stars. And the idea is that St. James, who was one of the disciples of Christ, felt called to convert the people of the Spanish peninsula. There's kind of a bit of mythology and stuff behind that. We just have to go with the flow there. And needless to say, he came to a rather sticky end without a head. And years later, his bones were discovered near the site of the current cathedral. And at the time that the bones were discovered by a peasant, the peasant saw all these lights in the sky, the field of stars. The other interpretation of field of stars is that it might refer to the Milky Way that is above the Camino. So we did the Camino de Santiago de Compostela. It's 500 miles, and we did it in a blisteringly hot summer. So why on earth would we do that? It's all my dad's fault. My dad and my mum are both in their 90s, living in the UK now. But in their younger days, they went on cruises. And they did this very largely to escape the British winter and the cold and flu season. And one of their cruises docked not too far from Compostela. So they took a tour there, and they were in the great cathedral in Compostela. And while they were there during the Mass, this enormous silver censer is swung down the aisles, and out of it billows all of this incense, and the monks chant along. And my dad said, "Jean, you've got to do this someday." So we did. And as I said, we did the French route. This starts in a place called Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port, so it starts in France. That's St. John, foot of the door, or opening of the pass. Very appropriate, because Chris comes from El Paso, which also means pass. So we started there, and the very first day, you have to cross the Pyrenees. It's one of the most challenging days of the entire Camino, and it was very daunting. And we got up the morning of that first day, and I want to get it over with. So I am raring to go. And Chris is like developing this sudden interest in photography, and he's distracting and so on. And not only did he just want to put it off for a little bit, but Chris liked to ritualize the beginning and the end of the Camino for each year. Well, we made it to Spain. We got to a town called Roncesvalles. Maybe I'm not pronouncing that correctly. And we stayed in a bed and breakfast there, whereas most pilgrims stay in huge dormitories. Given my eyesight, it's easier for me to be in a bed and breakfast. And those dormitories often have bed bugs, so we weren't too keen on that. And we stayed in bed and breakfast the whole route, and our heavy luggage was transported along from day to day. And that year, we made it to a cathedral city called Burgos, with a dramatic cathedral. The following year, we started again at the very same hotel in Burgos that we had ended at, and we hiked across the Meseta. The Meseta is usually thought of as being the most boring part of the Camino because it's relatively flat. Now, I kind of enjoyed that. And we walked very largely through fields of wheat, Chris referred to in his song. Interspersed in the fields of wheat, there were poppies, and there were little field mice down at the bottom of the stalks. And we did this day after day after day, walking about a half marathon every day for about 10 days. And it finally got to be a little boring, but just as it did, the landscape changed. We're in the foothills of the Galician mountains, and we have to go fairly steeply up and then all the way down to a town who I really can't pronounce, Molina Seca. They pronounce it very differently. And there it was a verdant green valley. There was a river running through it. It was a Sunday. People were out on the river banks, just relaxing, kicking back, having fun. And that's where we got to the second year. And then the third year, we again started at Molina Seca. We had a taxi driver who brought us from the airport, and he didn't speak any English. And he asked us where we were hiking the next couple of days. And he did this with a translation tool on his phone. We told him, and his phone, he showed us, said, "That's impossible." But we did it anyway. It was a particularly hot year that year, and we're now climbing through the mountains of Galicia. Somehow we made it through. We got to a town called O Sobrero. O Sobrero is on a ridge with steep valleys either side, and the houses are all round houses, and the people and the livestock all used to live together in the same house. Guess it was a little smelly. Then after that, we left O Sobrero, and we're beginning to make a descent down towards Santiago de Compostela. And that very next day, there were one of those little gems of the Camino. There was an elderly woman who was serving free pancakes. We all had free pancakes, and Chris made a donation, and she gave him a big kiss. Then we finally made it to Santiago de Compostela, and we had to be very persistent about getting into the church services. This was the Festival of St. James weekend, and the whole place was buzzing with energy. And we went to one mass where they did not swing the silver censer. Another time we tried, and there were so many people we couldn't get in. So the third time we tried, we went hours early and sat in the cathedral until, lo and behold, the major pilgrim mass happened. The silver censer swung. All this stuff billows out, which of course in the old days, the pilgrims would all be really smelly and disease-ridden and dirty and
Like
filthy.
we were.
So we weren't that bad. We'd had a shower by then. So the incense is really to disinfect the pilgrims. And it was quite a sight. I stood up afterwards and realized that there were tears on my face. So it was a wonderful experience. Many happy memories, particularly those cathedral cities of Burgos and Leon, the free pancakes, the free classical guitar concert, but most of all the people that we met. And we met people from across the world, from Brazil, from New Zealand, Australia, all kinds of places in Europe, and especially the great nation of Denmark. We met more Danish people than any others. And now Chris is going to sing for you a little more.
Along the way is your redemption, second chances in the sight. Along the way your resurrection, coming closer to the light. Along the way your sorrows dropped upon each mile you leave behind. And though the way is long, it has an end for each of us to find along the way. Along the way you walk in sun, along the way you walk in heat. Along the way you rest in little shops where peregrinos meet. Along the way share many languages, translation just a game that happy gestures simply supplement with meaning clearly plain. And every day there's no diverging from the road within the wood, while every day there is converging with the pilgrim neighborhood. And every day brings consolation of the priceless sleep at night, before emerging to another day, Santiago in our sights along the way.
So we hiked our Camino. We will never forget it. I've just about recovered from the blisters. And each year we combined our trips with visiting my family in the UK. There was a wedding, a diamond wedding, and a christening. And so each year, on the way home, we took another way. And I'm thinking about the Magi who took another way. And even Robert Frost in his poem took the road less traveled. He took another way. And more importantly than that, we discovered that when we finally did get home and we thought about it, we were another way. We had learned a lot more courage to face life's challenges. We had learned about humility, about our limitations. We had learned a lot more, a greater understanding of people of other cultures. And I guess we had learned to trust that hope will win out in the end. And I know that often in life things don't go to plan and we have to go another way. And my hope is that for all of you, for New Vision, when things don't turn out quite right, that you will have the opportunity to go home another way.
Along the way we live our freedom, along the way we greet old friends. Along the way we share the fervor to continue to the end. Along the way with gathered strength we learn to bear our daily load, and we live to journey on along that long unwinding road along the way, until the day you come across the end you sought along your way. Then pass beyond while singing Ultrea at close of day. Ultrea, Jesus ea, Ultrea, Jesus ea, eternally to follow those who led you to this day, the pilgrim congregation flowing gently to the sea. The pilgrim congregation growing boundless as the stars along the way.